Video games are an escape for a lot of us. They let us explore amazing places and do amazing things, but sometimes we don't even get the chance to experience them. Sometimes a game gets ripped away from us before it ever hits the store shelves. What is up, everybody? Jimmy or Chaos. Today, we're going to be talking about 20 of the most heartbreaking game cancelizations ever. You let me know which of these broke your heart the most that you were so looking forward to, and then they ripped it away from you. Drop a like, and let's get sad together. Let's sit around the campfire and think about what could have been. At number 20, Rainbow Six Patriots. Man, announced in late 2011, Patriots was going to be the next entry in the story-driven tactical shooter franchise known as Rainbow Six. This was before Rainbow Six Siege ever came along and completely changed the identity of the franchise. I mean, Rainbow Six Patriots would feature similar gameplay to the previous entries in the franchise, but with this, the state-of-the-art graphics, gun mechanics, work had been chugging along for a while. There was promotional material, and then Ubisoft suddenly removed it from their database. Apparently requested that all retailers stop talking about it because places like GameStop also suddenly deleted it from their website and canceled all the pre-orders for it. Then, after a couple years of confusion about whether or not the game still existed, it was announced that Rainbow Six Patriots would be canceled, and that Ubisoft was moving forward with a multiplayer Rainbow Six game instead, which that would quickly be confirmed as Siege. Now, Siege, of course, huge hit, right? Well, eventually. First year or two were rough, and then there was a lot of bad blood between longtime Rainbow Six fans and the publisher Ubisoft, because even though Siege is a well-designed game with a huge following, the classic Rainbow Six gameplay format also had a huge following. Those fans, they haven't gotten anything to eat in over a decade now. So I'm hoping that Rainbow Six gets back to its roots at some point in the future, but as long as Siege is making money, I don't really see that happening. Guys, do me a favor, make sure you're subscribed, turn on those notifications, and if you have any topic ideas you want for video game top 10s or COD history top 10s, let me know in the comments. I read every single comment on every single video, and this video is going up on New Year's Eve. So if I don't see you before tomorrow, I want to say Happy New Year's to each and every one of you. I hope you get to spend it with your loved ones, family, friends, and I want to know what your New Year's resolution is. Drop it in the comments. Mine's pretty deep, so I'll probably put a pinned comment and share that with you guys. At number 19, StarCraft Ghosts. It's always a little concerning when a long-running franchise decides to drastically change direction for a new game, but StarCraft Ghost was one of the few instances where people actually got excited for the change. Ghost was going to be a third-person stealth shooter set in the StarCraft universe. It was announced all the way back in 2002. Not only did the gameplay of StarCraft Ghost look fun, this would also have been one of the most up-close and personal looks at a StarCraft universe that we've ever gotten. This would have gave us more, honestly, insight as into how the various factions interacted with each other, expanded upon the story that was set up in StarCraft Brood War. But a couple years after the announcement, it didn't go well. In 2004, it was announced that the developer had shifted, which is never a good sign. In 2005, it was announced that the GameCube version was canceled, but there was no update on the PS2 or the Xbox versions. And then, 2006, Blizzard announced they had put the game on hold so they could assess their business strategy with the PS3 and the Xbox 360. But they still refused to officially cancel the project, suggesting to me that Ghost would eventually be released on the 7th generation consoles. And then a few years of silence, and then we got all the way to 2014, and then Blizzard finally just came out and confirmed they pulled the plug on it. In 2020, a bunch of in-development videos leaked online, and it made the cancellation hurt even more because this looked like it would have been a really fun game. I mean, maybe one day Blizzard will revisit the idea of a StarCraft shooter, but until then, just close our eyes and imagine how cool StarCraft Ghost might have been. At number 18, Star Wars Battlefront 3. So, following the original two Battlefront games, people were eager for a third installment, especially after the conclusion of the prequel trilogy and the rising popularity of the Clone Wars because of the original animated series. Then a third Battlefront game was indeed in development. It was. In fact, according to former developers, it was actually really close to being finished. This would have been an absolutely huge experience. Not only would it have refined all the combat mechanics from the first two Battlefront games, but it would have featured some of the most large-scale combat we've ever seen in a Star Wars game. We're talking seamless land-to-space combat. You could have teammates on the surface of a planet trying to capture objectives while you're in an X-Wing shooting down enemy fighters in the space above them. That would have been huge. But according to inside sources and former devs, the game was officially canceled in 2008 despite being in development for over 2 years and being just months away from completion. I mean, following a bunch of leadership changes at LucasArts throughout 2008, the new management team, for some reason, decided that the game wouldn't be ready in time for its planned release window. Instead of just pushing things back like we do now, they shut it down. I mean, there have been conflicting reports on just how much more time the game needed to be finished, but it didn't matter. Everyone agrees the game was almost finished, and there was a massive gameplay leak a few years ago where the most recent build of the game could actually be played on PC. It looked like it was going to be special. I will never understand why LucasArts pulled the plug on this. There had to have been something with upper management that we don't know about, because I can't see a single reason why they couldn't have just delayed it a few months instead of scrapping the whole thing and flushing all that money right down the toilet. I mean, this was Battlefront 3 back when Battlefront's franchise was in its prime. It would have made money no matter what. And since we're talking about canceled Star Wars projects, this one hurt. At number 17, Star Wars 1313. It really hurt because it would have ended up being probably the most unique Star Wars game ever made simply because of the tone. 1313 was a single-player action-adventure game similar to Star Wars Bounty Hunter, where you could play as a young Boba Fett as he worked jobs in the underground region of Coruscant, known as Level 1313. Now, the game action, it would have revolved around gadgets, weapons, like what you'd expect from Boba Fett. Would have been an extremely mature game, but it would have had bloody combat, probably an M rating. The game would give us a look at the criminal underworld of the Star Wars universe in a way that we never saw before, and it wouldn't pull any punches when it came to the violent methods that a lot of those characters used to stay in power. I mean, the game was revealed with an amazing trailer at E3 2012. Who remembers E3? And the hype, it was through the roof. But after Disney bought LucasArts in 2013, we probably should have seen the writing on the wall. Disney had their own idea of what they wanted to do with the Star Wars license. In a gritty M-rated Boba Fett game, it didn't fit their vision. So they canceled the game, laid off almost everybody at LucasArts in the process, and over the last decade, a few in-development clips have actually leaked showing the gameplay, and there's still a ton of demand for what would have been an extremely unique Star Wars experience. I mean, 1313, I don't know how much, it's been used a few times in Star Wars lore since the game's been canceled, but there's no way to get the game revived. As much as Disney likes to act like they're listening to their fan base, zero chance they're going to let a gory M-rated Star Wars game out the door under their watch. And I know people will say, Star Wars Outlaws, criminal underworld. No. This would have been different. At number 16, Days Gone 2. This one, it just frustrates and pisses me off. Days Gone was released in 2019 for the PS4. Got a pretty mediocre reception out of the gate from fans and critics after it released. But since it has garnered a huge following because of the unique take on the open world zombie formula. Honestly, I think we just weren't ready for this kind of game at that time when it was released, because open world games were everywhere, and even though Days Gone wasn't super complex or complicated, it did have a unique vibe to it that I don't think we were willing to give a proper chance until a few years later. Now, despite the reception at launch, Days Gone reportedly sold over 7 million copies as of early 2022. That's big. But it was also revealed a few years ago that the developers were planning on making a sequel. They even had early work done on it, but the pitch was unsuccessful, and Sony refused to give them funding for it, forcing the project to be scrapped. Now, honestly, I don't know why Days Gone 2 wasn't successful with the pitch. The game sold over 7 million copies and has a very passionate following to this date. And Sony's the same company that will greenlight flops like Concord and Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, but they won't greenlight a sequel to one of their most successful PS4 exclusives. Help me understand how that makes any sense. At number 15, Scalebound. I'm not sure why the heck the game was canceled, because it was one of the most hyped Microsoft exclusives ever following the reveal. Development started in 2013. It was being headed by Platinum Games, the same people who made Bayonetta, and most recently, Ninja Gaiden 4. Scalebound would be an epic action RPG where you could use fantasy weapons and magic to fight off enemies in grand fashion, give commands to your trusty dragon, help you in combat. This would have been an absolutely amazing one. And Platinum Games, it would have been their most ambitious project to date. There was a gameplay trailer released in 2015 and it blew people away. But seemingly out of nowhere, the game got axed in 2017. To this day, I don't know why. From what we can piece together from interviews, it does seem like Microsoft was having doubts that the game was going to draw in the kind of audience they were looking for, and Platinum Games was having doubts that the project would have been as profitable as an Xbox One exclusive, so they just cut their losses and pulled the plug. I mean, that being said, Platinum Games has flat out said they would love to pick the project back up, but they can't because Microsoft owns the IP and it's sitting on a shelf somewhere. I mean, the whole situation is a shame because this game could have been epic, and now we will never, ever get a chance to experience it. At number 14, Unreal Tournament 4. Who remembers when Epic Games used to actually make games? Following the explosion of Fortnite, Epic Games slowly canceled all their other projects, regardless of how far along they were into development, and one of those projects was a reboot of Unreal Tournament, simply titled Unreal Tournament. But that community was referring to Unreal Tournament 4. The game was very far into development. It was even publicly being played. I mean, work on the game was slow, but obviously passionate, and it would have been an awesome update to the classic arena shooter franchise's gameplay structure. But after Fortnite blew up, well, Epic Games lost all interest in working on a fast-paced, technically demanding, ultra-violent arena shooter. Why would they? The money tree just flows in with Fortnite. Updates on the project slowed down gradually until an official announcement was made late 2018, that the project would not be continued so Epic could focus on Fortnite. I mean, the recent in-development version of the game remained online for a few years until early 2023, and then the servers were shut down. I mean, I'm glad Epic made their money with Fortnite, but I think I speak for all gamers when I say I would love it if they actually went back to making other games every now and then. They're good at it. At number 13, Overwatch 2, the campaign. Overwatch 1, shut down. Replaced with Overwatch 2, partially to overhaul a bunch of the mechanics, but mainly so Blizzard could finally implement the massive PvE campaign that took advantage of the rich lore that Overwatch had been building for almost a decade at that point. Overwatch may be a PvP hero shooter. There's so many backstories being told through the animated shorts and the context clues, and fans have been begging Blizzard to do a proper campaign with the characters ever since the first game came out. Well, that was the main appeal of Overwatch 2. Not only would the PvP aspect of the game be bigger than ever, but there would also be the massive PvE campaign that everybody wanted. That's what we were promised. Overwatch 2 launched without the campaign because Blizzard apparently needed more time on it, so that's fair enough. Okay, let it cook. I mean, I guess. But then the months went by, and the campaign kept getting pushed back. We started to question what the point of all of it was until the announcement finally came that the PvE campaign was no longer in development. The community went berserk. They were pissed off for good reason. Overwatch 1 had been deleted from existence in favor of Overwatch 2, and the whole justification that we were given was so that Blizzard would have a more updated game to put the campaign into at a later date. And then they canceled the campaign. The whole thing. It was pointless, and it was a lie. I really don't know how the Overwatch community is doing these days, but I remember when this announcement hit the internet, and the entire gaming scene was pissed off. It was a missed opportunity to give fans something they literally been asking for since 2016. At number 12 today is the Knights of the Old Republic 3. Now, I'm glad we're finally getting a new Old Republic single-player game. I'm always going to wonder, though, what the planned KOTOR 3 would have been like. And yes, there was a KOTOR 3 in development at one point in the mid-2000s. In case you didn't know, BioWare made the first KOTOR game, but Obsidian made the second one. And apparently both studios had ideas for what the third game would be, with Obsidian having a much clearer version and seemingly being the main choice for the third game's developer, especially since BioWare was working on their own sci-fi RPG Mass Effect at the time. But in the mid-2000s, LucasArts decided to restructure how they made video games. Instead of licensing Star Wars out to third-party developers, they decided they now wanted to keep everything in-house, which meant all the plans for Knights of the Old Republic 3 were shut down immediately. Since LucasArts was never all that interested in a large-scale RPG, KOTOR 3 was never reconfirmed under a new development studio. But Obsidian, they're one of the best RPG developers of all time. I would have absolutely loved to see what they would have come up with KOTOR 3, especially if they were given a little more time to cook, because KOTOR 2's development was notoriously rushed. At number 11, Alice, Asylum. American McGee's Alice games are two of the best cult classics of the 21st century. The first game, released all the way back in 2000. The sequel, which was Alice Madness Returns, released in 2011. Both of these are dark and twisted interpretations of the Alice in Wonderland series. You got 3D platforming, treasure hunting, hack and slash combat, all with the elements of psychological horror. Now, neither game was ever a huge sales success, but they have good followings, and it was enough to demand that the third game get greenlit, called Alice Asylum. The concept for the game? It was demented, too. It would conclude the trilogy by having Alice go back into Wonderland after the whole place had been distorted by the PTSD she developed from the events of the first two games, which would make this version of Wonderland even more messed up, even more horrific than the first two. I mean, interest in the game? It was there. People were excited to hear that it was in the works, but there was one major problem. EA, Electronic Arts, had published the first two Alice games. They own the IP as a result. And when American McGee pitched Alice Asylum to them, they turned him down. But American McGee and his team were persistent. They decided to crowdfund the game's development instead and publish it as an indie title. All they needed was EA to give their blessing for them to use the Alice IP. Guess what? EA wouldn't have to pay a single cent for the game's development and publishing. All they had to do was sign a couple papers that allowed American McGee to use the Alice IP, and then EA would sit back, earn royalties from a game they didn't even have to pay to develop. Win-win, right? Apparently not to EA, because according to developers, EA outright refused to let them use the Alice IP despite it costing them nothing, which means Alice Asylum had to be shut down despite being totally crowdfunded. EA literally canceled the game for no reason. All they had to do was let American McGee's team use the Alice IP and they would make a bunch of free money. Instead, they legally blocked them from making the game. Yeah, come on. I mean, I really see why people love Electronic Arts. At number 10, Perfect Dark. Here's a recent entry. In case you weren't playing console FPS games in the late 90s or early 2000s, Perfect Dark was a spiritual successor to GoldenEye 007, which is one of my favorite games of all time, but also one of the most innovative FPS titles ever. Classic Perfect Dark took the gameplay of GoldenEye, enhanced everything, graphics, AI, levels, near-future sci-fi setting. There was a sequel for the Xbox 360 called Perfect Dark Zero in 2005, and then there was a remaster of the first game in 2010, but since then, the franchise, crickets, dormant, quiet. Microsoft announced a reboot of the Perfect Dark IP in 2020 with a new game simply titled Perfect Dark. It was in development in a new studio called The Initiative, which had been established by Microsoft just 2 years earlier, but apparently there was a lot of development issues and upper management drama, leading to the game getting pushed back again and again till it was finally canceled in July of 2025. Yep. So yeah, the whole thing was one giant waste of money. The Microsoft opened a whole new studio just for this game, and then the game didn't even come out, and the studio had to be shut down before it ever got to release a single project. I mean, that's modern gaming. It is. At number 9, Twisted Metal Reboot. Another recent entry. Twisted Metal was planning on getting a reboot from Fire Sprite Studios, and it was going to be this massive ongoing live service game. And even though people tend to have negative opinions of live service games these days, which I get, I was actually pretty excited for this one because it seemed like a solid franchise to do something with. Twisted Metal is a vehicular combat game, but it also has an emphasis on multiplayer, so it would make sense to have a big reboot with live service elements for new cars, arenas, all that to be added to the mix, kind of like how Sony handles the Gran Turismo franchise. But in 2024, it was confirmed that the Twisted Metal reboot was no longer in development because Sony was trying to cut back on live service games. I will never understand why Sony decided to let live service stinkers like Concord come out the door, but freaking Twisted Metal gets canceled. There is no way they thought Concord would be a more successful game. Is there? I mean, is there? Since we're talking about live service Sony games, let's go in again. At number 8, The Last of Us Factions. Back when Last of Us 2 was in development, Naughty Dog released a statement claiming they were cutting the multiplayer portion of the game so they could put more development time into it and release it later as its own standalone live service game. It was a good idea. Last of Us had a really underrated multiplayer mode. Fanbase was on board with giving Naughty Dog extra time to focus on expanding upon that, making something really cool. But then the years went by, no updates on what was happening, and eventually, Naughty Dog released a statement more than 5 years after the announcement that the live service game was in development, and they said there was no longer any work. They weren't working on it because they didn't want to dedicate resources to supporting it long term. I'm sorry. That is such a bad excuse for canceling a game. You're really telling me that Naughty Dog spent 5 years working on a live service game and then decided they didn't want to support a live service game? Did they not know what a live service game would require of them? I'm sorry. I love Naughty Dog, but that's one of the most obvious examples of a AAA mismanagement I've ever heard. There is no reason you should be spending 5 years of time and money on a project and then decide that you don't actually want to do it. That's a decision that should have been made in year 1. At number 7, Rocksteady's Superman game. Now, to be fair, we never got official confirmation that this game was in development, but also the writing was on the freaking wall, man. Over the last decade, we've gotten a lot of inside reports that claim there was indeed a Superman game in development at Rocksteady, but it was scrapped in favor of the Suicide Squad game, and we all saw how that turned out. But if you go back to the mid-2010s, Rocksteady was teasing a Superman game left and right. Heck, you could boot up Batman Arkham Knight. You could roam around the map. You'll see what I mean. There's several obvious Superman teasers in Arkham Knight, including some of the NPC dialogue directly referencing him. But after Rocksteady fell silent in the years following the release of Arkham Knight, we probably should have known we were never going to get what we wanted. According to inside reports, the Superman game was reworked into a Suicide Squad game, which was reworked into a live service Suicide Squad game. And then we got Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League in 2024, and the rest is history. Ugly, depressing history. Just imagine. We could have got a Superman game in the vein of the Arkham series, but we got Suicide Squad. At number 6, Conker's Other Bad Day. This is going way back. Conker's Bad Fur Day was released in 2001 on the Nintendo 64, which still surprises me. Quickly became a cult classic. Despite being a colorful 3D platformer similar to games like Donkey Kong and Banjo-Kazooie, Conker's Bad Fur Day was vulgar, violent, mature. It was not kid-friendly, despite being exclusively on a Nintendo console. The game was praised for the level design, the writing, but the low sales made it hard for anyone to justify signing off on a sequel. Developers were Rare. They were determined to keep the train rolling after all the praise they received for the first game, so they quickly started development on a sequel called Conker's Other Bad Day. It would pick up right where the first game left off, and the story had already been finalized, but less than a year after work began, Rare was purchased by Microsoft. And Microsoft told them they weren't interested in the Conker sequel, and they shut the project down. Weirdly enough, Microsoft did demand Rare do a full remake of Conker's Bad Fur Day for the Xbox, which was released in 2005 as Conker Live and Reloaded. So they didn't want a Conker sequel, but they did want a remake? I mean, somebody needs to make that one make sense to me, because now we don't have the second Conker game, but we do have a censored and less charming version of the original. Thanks, Microsoft. That's exactly what we wanted. All these publishers just know exactly what we want. Now we arrive at the top 5. Star Wars The Force Unleashed 3. One more Star Wars cancellation, right? This one stings. Even though The Force Unleashed 2 wasn't the best, it had decent ideas. There was plenty of cool places the series could have gone, and according to several people involved with the franchise, this story was supposed to have a third and final installment to wrap up the story and conclude the trilogy. Now, in early 2013, Force Unleashed 3 was straight up confirmed by the voice actor for Starkiller, claiming the story was in the works and it would be released for next-gen consoles like the PS4 and the Xbox One. He also mentioned that the game couldn't be released until after The Force Awakens came out, seemingly because of some kind of agreement with Disney not to steal the spotlight away from the big Star Wars revival they were planning at the time. But a few months after all that information came out, Disney broke out the hammer. They shut down LucasArts, canceled all its projects in the process, which meant Force Unleashed 3 was in the trash. Since then, details have surfaced about what the game would have looked like. The gameplay apparently would have been more open world and larger scale, and the story apparently would have been about the Emperor finding a new apprentice to replace Darth Vader. That would actually force Vader and Starkiller to team up in order to overthrow him before the new apprentice could be found and trained. The Force Unleashed, great piece of Star Wars storytelling. I really, really wish the third game got made, because as it stands, Force Unleashed 2 is a disappointing way to end. At number 4, Agent. It's fun to think about what Rockstar would be doing if they weren't married to GTA and Red Dead, right? I mean, it really seems like those are the only two things Rockstar will ever do moving forward, but there was a time when the studio was working on a ton of different games and franchises. Rockstar actually announced an entirely new IP back in 2007 called Agent. It would be an exclusive thing to the PlayStation 3. It was going to be a stealth action game set in the 1970s. According to press releases, the game would take players into the new world of counterintelligence, espionage, political assassinations, all of that during the Cold War. A Rockstar stealth action game set during the Cold War sounds freaking awesome, and apparently the project got pretty far into development before somebody at the top of the ladder, the Suits, pulled the plug. The then president of Take-Two Interactive even called the game genre-defining, and it would be a whole new way of experiencing video games that we've never seen. I mean, we got more details about the game in 2009, including a promise from Rockstar the game would be released as early 2010, although that was walked back a few months later, which wasn't out of the ordinary. Since this is Rockstar we're talking about, the delay of games happens. But starting in 2010, things got weird. Every once in a while, somebody at Take-Two or Rockstar would confirm the game was still being worked on. There's no longer a release window. Then at E3 2011, the CEO of Sony, who had been helping fund the project, made a comment about how they weren't sure if the game was still going to be a PS3 exclusive, which is probably the kind of thing you should know if you're a CEO, right? Another year goes by, no news, no cancellation, and then, once the PS4 came out, there was no confirmation that Agent was moving to the new console. Then years went by, no news until literally 2018. Rockstar declined to renew the Agent trademark, officially canceling the project. Now, according to some former Rockstar devs, the higher-ups were worried about how much Agent's development would take away from the development of GTA 5. And after GTA 5 exploded, well, the bosses at Rockstar, they were not interested in a linear game like that at all. In 2025, Dan Houser of Rockstar even said in an interview that Agent was abandoned because it wouldn't work with Rockstar's current open world format. So yeah, GTA 5, it killed Agent. And as much as I love GTA 5, it kind of sucks. At number 3, Bully 2. Speaking of canceled Rockstar games, there was actually a sequel to Bully in development at one point, but we don't know what happened, or do we? According to an interview with Rockstar co-founder Dan Houser in late 2025, Bully 2 was actually seriously in development at Rockstar following the first game's relative success, but then there were several reasons for it never getting fully off the ground. So in case you didn't know, Bully was a Rockstar game from 2006. Pretty huge success. Masterfully translated the classic GTA format to a private academy and had you playing as a new student trying to stand up to a gang of bullies terrorizing the campus. Now, the years since Bully's release, several leaks have proven the game existed at one point, including some Rockstar employees putting the game on their resumes and even a few in-progress assets that started making their way around the internet, which got us excited. But according to Dan, the game was ultimately canceled because the team assigned to it wasn't big enough to make it happen in a reasonable amount of time. His exact quote was, "I think it was just bandwidth issues." I mean, if you've got a small lead creative and a small senior leadership crew, you just can't do all the projects you want. It makes sense because in the years following Bully's release, Rockstar started focusing on major blockbuster open world games. So those smaller in-house teams, they would have been working on something like Bully. Probably it wasn't a priority. It would get absorbed into the larger workforce for games like GTA 5 and Red Dead 2. I think it's a shame because if Rockstar allowed these smaller teams to thrive like they did during the PS2 and PS3 era, we would be getting new Rockstar games every couple years. But instead, we get one new Rockstar game every 7 to 8 to 9 years, depending on when GTA finally comes out, GTA 6. At number 2, Titanfall 3. This one hurts and it's just stupid, okay? I love Titanfall 2 so much. The game had an absolutely massive following, even if it was a total flop upon release because EA decided to give it the world's worst release date window. They literally dropped this game in between Battlefield 1 and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare and Modern Warfare Remastered in less than a month after Gears 4. There was no way it had a chance. But according to several Respawn Entertainment developers, there was a third Titanfall game in development at one point, and that work got relatively far before upper management decided it was a safer financial move to rework the assets into something that was new. That ended up being Apex Legends, which did end up making them a lot of money in the universe, and I enjoy Apex. But the fact that we lost Titanfall 3, also doesn't help because the fact that Apex was so successful, we now have 100% confirmation that Titanfall is never going to be the main focus of the universe again, despite the fans crying for it. Apex Legends continues to make insane amounts of money on a relatively low ongoing budget. Titanfall was a major AAA game that has financially disappointed EA twice. There is no way EA is going to let Respawn pivot away from Apex so they can go back to the series that they don't have faith in. That's not how the gaming world works. But yes, in case you needed to cry a little today on this video, now you know. Titanfall 3 was in development at one point. Then it was scrapped in favor of Apex. I mean, maybe one day we'll get TF3 back on the menu, but for now, we don't. And at number 1 today, Silent Hills. Who remembers PT? The random demo that showed up on the PlayStation Store in 2014 that took over the internet. We didn't even know what this thing was, and if you weren't there for this, you missed out on one of the coolest game teasers ever. So on a random day in August of 2014, a demo simply called PT by a developer nobody had ever heard of, I think it was 7780 Studios or 7780 Studios, showed up and started going viral for being one of the most terrifying experiences in gaming history. You walked through the bottom floor of a house over and over again. You noticed slight changes as the building descended further into a creepy town. It was eventually revealed that PT was not just some random indie game that came out of nowhere. It was instead the playable teaser for Silent Hills, a new mainline installment to the iconic horror franchise, and it was being directed by gaming legend himself, Hideo Kojima, alongside movie legend Guillermo del Toro. The game had been in development for 2 years at the time. It was supposed to release within a year of PT going live, and then there was a massive falling out between Kojima and the game's publisher, Konami. So, Konami started removing Kojima's name from their website, scrubbing his presence from the Metal Gear franchise as a whole, and shortly afterwards, rumors started floating around about this also meaning Silent Hills would be canceled. Then a few days after that, PT pulled from the PlayStation Store. An anonymous report started coming out that Konami had pulled the plug on all of Kojima's projects, including Silent Hills. The game was officially canceled in April of 2015. To this day, we really don't know what happened behind closed doors between Konami and Kojima. People have speculated it was because Konami wanted to start jumping on more profitable gaming markets like mobile gaming and stuff like that, while Kojima wanted to keep making big budget things like Metal Gear Solid, and this disagreement led to them getting pretty petty about the whole thing. At the end of the day, we don't know exactly what was said, or why the disagreement eventually led to Silent Hills getting shut down after 2 whole years in development and the massive marketing success that was the playable teaser, PT. This is one of the most heartbreaking cancellations in gaming history. Had to put it at number 1 today. If Silent Hills was just half as good as PT, it would have been one of the greatest horror games ever made. Seriously, thanks a lot, Konami. There you have it, my friends. Happy New Year. I'll see you soon.